I don't have a question today, so.
I have a question for you.
For me?
Yeah.
What?
If you were a vegetable. Hello, and welcome to the Nicks Boots from Start to Finish podcast. We're joined by Lucas Grassberger,
Thanks for having me.
Andrew Zamansky,
Howdy.
and then produced by award winner Kelsey Lursbach. I am your host, Shuyler Mao. Look forward to getting into this. This is a Q&A session where we're kind of trying to find the balance between innovation and tradition in handmade boots. Yeah, so we've been doing this since 64, right?
Almost 60 years.
Almost 60 years. I know. I've kind of been wondering what we're going to do to celebrate the 60th anniversary. We've been doing things not the same way, but there are definitely common threads, I think, since that started back then. Sole stitching and lasting and cutting by hand, not by hand, but instead of using like a machine, to automate the cutting process, we do everything with beam presses and there's some artistry to it. Of course, some of the leathers and the materials that we use are difficult to work with some modern shoemaking machinery, and so we're kind of forced to do it by hand. And like I think sewing is a good example of that, but not hand sewing, but like using the sewing machines,
Right.
Like if you
Hand guided, yeah.
Like if you ever went to like a McRae or Belleville, is that
Belleville,
the other?
yeah.
Belleville. Some of these like domestic, large volume, like military boot manufacturers, they'll actually have like a sewing machine that is kind of like laser guided and stitches everything together. Nobody actually touches it. It's pretty crazy, but you have to work with a certain type of material to do that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, Andrew, you want to talk about what the heritage of the boot making process means to you? You've been doing this for what, 10 years, 12?
Right around nine years.
Okay.
Yeah. 2016. So maybe going on eight, 9.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, I just like the blend of the handmade versus what we can do with some of the machines that are out there without sacrificing anything.
Yep.
But there's a lot of pride in the handmade craft. So I think it's important that you learn that, as you're entering the industry or the company, Pacific Northwest Boots. But I kind of like just to push the envelope a little bit.
Yep.
See what kind of crazy designs.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gives us some more flexibility, the fact that we're doing a lot of this by hand. We can change things on the fly and come up with new ideas. We don't have to like set up tooling or, like a new manufacturing line or something like that. We can kind of experiment a little bit more. Yeah, it's a good point. Lucas, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this probably more often than I should, but like the industry we're in, shoemaking in general, I mean, I think it's got to be one of the oldest professions out there. It's kind of daunting a little bit thinking back just like the history of shoemaking and like, that saying, standing on the shoulder of giants. I mean, we've got thousands of years of shoemaking history, innovation that we're kind of picking up and trying to find that, where we can improve upon it. There's a lot of shoes out there today that are all about, quantity over quality. It's really humbling to be in an industry like this. I really like, looking at old history of, boots from 100 years ago, and they're almost, you cut them in half, look at them, and they're almost identical to what we're doing now.
Yeah, you could say shoemaking is maybe the oldest legal profession, for sure.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely. So, Andrew, you and I and Serge talk about this a decent amount, the importance of kind of preserving some of these traditional techniques and skills.
Right.
And maybe talk about some of the ways you approach that, like creating a bench. I feel like we've gotten a little more sophisticated in terms of cross-training and kind of developing development plans for people. Right. Do you mind speaking to that?
Yeah. One of the cool things that I've noticed is kind of the evolution from like a sit last where it's done much in lap, and then you got the next stage where it's sit last, and you have like a mini jack, but now everything's almost done by just standing. And so having that is like super nice for cross training individuals, because you can bottom, you can last, you can shank, you can do all these steps from, you know, the same position and using a lot of the same tools.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting. Like if you see our factory, you'll notice that some people last sitting down and some people last standing up. And it seems to me there's maybe some of our older overseas, you know, people.
Very European.
It's a very European approach to do it on the bench. Yeah. Whereas, you know, I think the original PNW heritage is probably mostly standing. So it's kind of a weird mashup. There's not really a better way, but it is interesting that you point out that, like, if you do it from a standing position, that's kind of right in line with how you would do all the other tasks.
Like in a quality sense, they're comparable, but from an efficiency standpoint, standing's definitely the way to go.
Okay. So, you know, we talk about like what is sort of unique about our products. Sure. And I think, yes, the craftsmanship is cool and something to, like, you know, be proud of. I do think it does lend, I guess I go back to, like, the materials that we use do require some of these hand techniques. Sure. So like if you go to, you know, again, I'll go back to like the Bellevilles or the McRae's, but even like a large Danner or Red Wing line, there are certain sacrifices that are made to improve manufacturability. And that's oftentimes why you will see certain like pour-on inserts or even like cardboard inserts and fiberboard and that sort of thing. Whereas, you know, we of course insist kind of on all leather and all natural materials, whether that's, you know, sometimes that's a rubber, a little more rubber in the midsole or the slipsole area on some of our newer items. But yeah, it does kind of require some of the handmade capabilities. I think our counters might be a good example of that. You know, like I think those are challenging for some modern machines to work with and some modern techniques. How we skive is kind of interesting. So, you know, we have talked to other manufacturers and they're always kind of surprised at how we do things, you know, which is good and bad, you know, and I think it's funny because, like, we just don't know what we don't know. Obviously, I think the product is very impressive, but it does kind of require some hand techniques that maybe you wouldn't have to do if you were, you know, trying to crank out thousands of boots every day. I don't know. Any thoughts on that kind of legacy of how we've done things, or hand making techniques, and how that impacts, like, you know, the timelessness or the authenticity or the
I mean, it's something
awesomeness.
we talk about legacy a lot when we're discussing, you know, new products, just in terms of marketing. You know, there's a lot of things we do that I feel like we do because we've always done it. You know, a perfect example of that is, like, you know, stitching through the sole, our super beefy construction. It's arguable that's, you know, maybe not necessary for the durability of the boot because, you know, we have good glue technology now that'll hold everything together. But it's one of those things where, you know, just trying to find that avenue of, like, this is the way it's always been done. Is that because it's the best way of doing it? Or is it just because this is how we've always done it for 60 years? And I think we've done a really good job, at least in the last few years, of embracing the fact that, like, maybe some of these techniques aren't the best, like sitting versus standing, where we're like, let's reevaluate this a little bit. We're not to find the best, you know, quality, the best efficiency without sacrificing anything.
We've definitely removed some redundancies for efficiency, for sure. The McKay switched up the shape of the shank. I think what we do well is we kind of have this nice, every time we release a new line, like the 360s, it's kind of it's like our stepping forward into newer styles of boots, but it still has that, you know, traditional look, and it has like mostly the traditional build. So we have this nice blend of, you know, the old with the new. I think that we do that pretty nicely. Yeah,
I mean, it's funny because, like, you if you took any one of these things individually, most of them are not, like, you know, big jumps forward, but they all add up, right? It's like all those things kind of come together. And I think, like, you know, this 55 wedge approach that we're taking, which I know we need a little more, you know, fine tuning on, but it's pretty darn close. I think that's an interesting approach that we've taken on that on that part.
But I like that a lot. The 55 wedge. I think it's one of our. It's going to be a really nice product.
Well,
we just have to figure out the technicals of it to make it more manufacturable.
Yeah, because right now it just takes a while, right?
Right.
Yeah. So we'll get there, but it is like an interesting mashup of that legacy, like 55, right? Who
It's funny because it's the same thing, it's just done differently.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what's cool.
Yeah.
It's like it's nothing new. It's just newly done.
Yeah.
No, but I think in an interesting way, though.
Absolutely. I think it's a great example of this talk of, legacy and innovation. Like, we're kind of in our small space, we're kind of the last to offer this thing.
Yep.
But the reason is because we looked at everything and went, yeah, sure, they accomplished it, but here's the problems with that, here's the problem. Like, we used to do it too, and people asked, and we just didn't think it was good enough. And so rather than, continuing that way of doing it, we stepped back. We said, actually, we're gonna start from ground zero. We're gonna, what are we trying to accomplish? Let's find the right way of doing that.
Yep. Yeah, I think some of the examples of innovation here. So the question is examples of innovative approaches to design, materials, and the production process. I think Andrew's mentioned a good few examples of that. I think materials are one where I think glue is actually, we do definitely have like a mechanical connection point with all the boots, but like glue is something we've been improving over the last few years. And I think that's really important. It's still kind of your first line of defense, I think, from an attachment standpoint. And then design, we're reaching outside of our little space here to get inspiration, and B, actually kind of collaborating with some other creators who are maybe more exposed to the broader boot world or shoe world even. And I think you guys will be seeing some examples of that coming up over the next few months. It's a good question for you, Lucas. So talk about how we try to both preserve tradition and also meet modern customer expectations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, especially because we have customers who have been with us for 10, 20 years. I mean, every time we think about changing something, updating something, one of the first questions is like, well, what about those existing customers? Like I always go back to the sole stack of like the stitch through, non-stitch through. It used to be every 67 last was a non-stitch through, every 55 was a stitch through, that Nicks first contender stack up. And, we wanted to get away from that because it was messy, it was confusing. One of those didn't, necessarily have all the benefits, but rather than just doing away with that completely, it's decided to make it an option now instead. So you've got your thick versus thicker. It is tough because there are so many of our customers who have been with us for years and years. We don't want to pull the rug out from under them, but at a certain point you have to like explain, we decided to change things because actually we weren't doing things the best way possible. This might not be what you're used to, but we think this is a better way of doing it. It's a difficult thing to navigate. Sometimes you just have to, I think, just do it. Just say, yeah, we're gonna get 5 or 6 people who, got this 20 years ago and are gonna be like, what the heck? Where's this option? And sometimes, yes, have to let the customer know like this is the best option.
Yep. Andrew, what are some techniques, technologies, or trends that you think could affect boot making in the coming years?
I think automatic lasting, that could affect boot making quite a bit. And when I say automatic lasting, it's never, especially with the Pacific Northwest build, it's never going to be fully machine. There's very much hands-on approach where you still have to use the same techniques.
It's like a robot pincher.
Yeah, so in part, because there's a lot of prep and stuff, so a lot of the components and a lot of the movements is still handmade, but that's going to affect,
you can save your hands too a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you can sometimes get a superior quality depending on what you're looking for. If we're working with, if you want like a super hardy boot, a machine's going to be able to pull our max support walnuts a lot harder than our bootmaker hands can. Other things.
How does that affect your workout regimen?
I don't have to do forearms. Forearms are all here. Every day's a forearm day.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's other things that could or could not affect. You could see more nailing happening with hydraulics or air pressure, right?
Sure.
Things like that. We do our caps more like with a
nail gun
instead of by hand. So little things like that'll start to seep in, I think.
Yeah.
And start changing some things.
Yep. Yeah, I think the thing that has always, I mean, one of our biggest failure points or maybe points of exposure has always been the Rapid E sole stitchers.
Yeah.
So these are 60, 70-year-old tech that they don't make anymore. And there are fewer and fewer and fewer people who actually know how to repair them. Whenever one of these things goes down, we're flying somebody out from the other side of the country for 5 figures to hopefully fix it. And usually they do, but not always. And so we've got some new machines to kind of accomplish this, but there's a very limited amount out there that can handle this, the thicknesses that we're dealing with and that sort of thing. So I'm just very grateful that we've found some new technological solutions that let us keep making things the same way, but more efficiently with a repair manual, with replacement parts and that sort of thing. So that's cool.
Yeah, I don't think, unless we stray totally away from Pacific Northwest builds, there's always going to be a need for a much more hands-on made boot, especially with the thicknesses of leather, because they have all sorts of machines. They've got ones that automatically last not only just the toes but the heels.
Yeah.
But the nails on those are so small, there's no way.
Yeah.
But it can work in part as a shaper to get a more uniform shape for the bootmaker to come through and then hand last.
Yeah, it's kind of a hybrid thing. I think it could be pretty cool. Let's get to some Reddit questions here. What are some internal metrics for a successful / unsuccessful prototype? How do you know it'll sell? Good question. So I guess this would be kind of prior to it actually hitting the marketplace. Generally, like we do benchmark fit, so we'll compare people with known foot sizes and make sure that they fit similarly to try and simplify the purchase process for people who it's the same size as your 55, for example, if it's like a new last or new pattern, for example. And then we've gotten much more sophisticated from a testing standpoint. So we do work with some independent laboratories where we'll actually do pull tests and slip testing, EH testing, that sort of thing, where we do actually make sure we get certification on that stuff or that it kind of meets our standards. That's been kind of an interesting thing to observe and see where our existing products are at and like where these new ones would be as well. I don't know. What else am I missing here?
Yeah, I mean, we do, in terms of new prototypes, we do a lot of internal testing, put them on people's feet.
Yep.
I mean, ultimately, that's the best way to figure out if it's going to work. In terms of like knowing whether it's going to be popular or not, that's a little bit tougher to really know until you've launched it.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of boots out there. There's a lot of market research you can do in terms of just like what's popular, what's not. But ultimately, if it's a new design, if it's unique to us, like the Chelsea, for example, Chelseas are very popular, but there's nothing out there like our Chelsea. So it was always a little bit of it's
a gamble.
Yeah, we think it's going to be popular, but this is different. This is something new. Same with our Western boot.
Yeah,
there's tons of Western boots out there, but there's nothing currently anymore, as far as I know, that's like heavy duty handmade Western work boot.
Right.
It's kind of a hole in the market.
Yep.
And both of those things did really, really well.
Yep.
I think time cost of manufacturing plays a role as well.
Yep.
Sometimes a prototype doesn't get scrapped, but just gets reworked a little bit for manufacturing. I know some of the 360s,
right?
They got reworked a little bit for some of the collabs we do.
Yep. Do you intend to incorporate any automation in the production process? I mean, automation is like a strong word, in my opinion.
Right.
I would call it mechanical assistance would probably be where we have, actually.
I think that's more accurate for sure.
So, yeah, some help with the lasting, pneumatically driven nails, for example. Those are some things that have happened more recently. I don't know. I could see certain leathers potentially being a good fit for the automatic cutting machines, maybe someday.
Yeah.
The automatic cutting machines are always like, they're traditionally like the best investment because they dramatically reduce your wastage.
Right.
Now you still need somebody to mark up the hide,
inspect it, make sure
inspect it.
You're literally just cutting out that process of putting the die on, pressing the button, and grabbing the pieces.
It does give me some pause. I think it depends really on the leathers that we would work with, and also like, I think it'd be a pretty steep learning curve because we don't want to be using like bellies for vamps, for example, or even quarters, or so there's certain limitations that I think we face because of like the high degree of quality that we expect to operate with. But that's something that's like floating in the back of my mind. I wouldn't say anything is imminent there or anything like that.
I mean, in terms of just like that question of, towing the fine line between legacy and modern customers. I mean, I feel like that the word handmade is like the biggest thing we always have on our mind. It's like, in terms of like, lasting machines or laser cutters for leather, there's this stigma behind a person doing it by hand, pulling out the hand tools and doing it themselves, that, there's a lot of people out there who think, oh, it's handmade, it must be better.
Well, and I think in our case, it often is, but it would always go through this prism of like, will this make a better product?
Exactly. That's kind of the point I was getting to is, there's a lot of processes that we do mostly by hand, but, there might be some better ways of doing it that leads to a better product, leads to more efficiency. I mean, that was the whole reason we got rid of hand welting.
Yeah.
It's one of the big things. Caused a little bit of a stir when we did it. That was another one of those things we kind of eased away from it. We still had it as an option for existing customers, and then eventually got rid of it. But ultimately, it took a lot more time. It was really hard on bootmakers' hands. I don't think there's any actual benefit to hand lasting versus,
or hand stitching,
hand sewing,
yes, and welting, versus what we do.
Any thoughts, Andrew?
When it comes to my department, I make sure that everyone knows how to do things by hand before they learn any of our machines. Because it's important, one, if anything ever happens to the machines, you don't want to be useless. And then two, it's important to be able to, machines aren't perfect. You need to be able to fix anything that happens. And, there are some limitations with our leathers. There are some limitations with some of our styles. And it's important to be able to, know how to build it the old school way because, at our bones, that's what we are.
Yep. The second part is, how are you planning to manage lead times as the brand continues to grow? I mean,
machines, baby.
No, it's all about training and onboarding, and like we've hit a little bit of a plateau from a production ramp up standpoint, sort of unexpectedly. We had some just some bottlenecks in really in sewing, and so that's something that kind of happened due to some personal circumstances and leaves and that sort of thing. I do feel like we're finally turning the corner on that, and so ideally we'll kind of get back on that upward trajectory by the end of the year. But that's really the short answer, so we need to increase production. And then we do, we are kind of hyper aware on lead times, and especially with the different categories. So we do kind of manage it by reducing, right now we've reduced options in quick ship because we are frankly not shipping very quickly right now, to our chagrin. And so we do have I do have a production goal and production schedule and production calendar. And unfortunately we just haven't been hitting it. It's frustrating because we have made some major strides in a lot of other areas, and boot making was traditionally almost always the bottleneck for us over the last couple of years. And that's not the case. So kudos to you on that.
Thank you. You've got a really solid core over there.
So now it's just you kind of break the process at some point or at some place along the way. And right now that's kind of in that sewing portion. So we're working through that. I do think we have the people in place to do it. It's just kind of right now a training and kind of getting up to speed issue. Where do we draw the line, the hard line between legacy and innovation? Or do you plan to draw that line at all? Good question.
I think it always, I mean, I don't know if we would draw that line necessarily, but I think it always ultimately comes down to quality.
Yeah. And, well, I think there's a style that we make, you know, like go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, like, I feel like we'll always have like our old school, you know, Builder
Yep.
Pro lines and
Yep.
all that. And as we release new lines, that doesn't mean we get rid of old lines. I mean, I might be, you know, unless they're like unpopular, nobody buys
absolutely.
them
Sure.
or something.
Yeah,
But
I don't think we'll ever do like direct attached soles or, you know, vulcanized, you know,
Yep.
rubber.
At least not under the Nicks name,
Yeah.
for sure. You know,
I think Nicks will always be Nicks.
Yeah.
So I guess, there is a line we draw.
Yeah, there is a line.
There's innovations that are out there that other boot companies are doing that have pros and cons that we probably won't touch under the Nicks name because that's just not what Nicks is.
but I mean, stitch down, new patterns, new soles. I guess I would say I feel like while staying true to kind of who Nicks is, it's still a pretty broad opportunity base, you know, for us. Like if you can do new soles, if you can do new patterns, if you can do new leathers, if you can do, you know, these things, then the world is kind of your oyster. But we're never going to do cemented construction. Like, so, you know, unless we do sneakers or something like that, you know, but
That'd be
like
kinda cool.
Sobel, if we get a Sobel machine, but like, or Strobel, sorry. But, I don't know, like Trent and Heath made those sick sandals.
Yeah.
I think those were just glued,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know.
I've tried my hand at doing that. Remember the strap design that I was trying to do?
Oh,
and then I
right,
just
right,
never
the-
got,
Back to the
Got too
Future.
busy.
Well, that's the hardest part of the construction, according to them, is you're talking about sandals?
No,
he's
I'm
He's talking about the boot he wanted to
the
make
boot that
where
I
it was
wanted
like
to make.
straps.
Oh,
instead of
right,
laces.
right.
Very much sneaker look.
Yep.
But
Yeah, that was cool. What happened, man?
I just, you know, too many irons in the fire.
Yeah, it's
You know
fair.
what I mean?
I know.
I'd like to talk to Marcel about it.
Maybe we should. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. That was an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool.
Yeah. Okay. But that wasn't, that was like straps instead of laces. We were kind of already do that stuff, right?
Yeah,
That was like the main change.
right.
What more info can you share about the new sub brand? So we are hard at work on this right now. It's like getting close to the finish line here. But this idea was to come up with a much more refined boot, frankly, than kind of what people associate with us. It'll be under a different brand. We are working with a pattern maker, an experienced boot maker, and I'm going to say know-it-all, but I mean that in a good way. Like, he knows almost everything about boots and shoes. And so we have learned a lot through the process, and we'll be incorporating it into this approach. And so you'd be looking at like denser stitching, some different materials, like frankly, all new materials, so like leather soles, brass nails, some kind of interesting things we're doing with the heel stack. Steel shank. It's really and a new lasts as well. Quite different from what you're kind of used to seeing from us, and really just a belief that why can't a PNW boot company make, you know, one of the best boots in the world? And so, you know, from a fashion standpoint, and so we're trying that, and I do think that opens up like another world to us a little bit. And also I would expect to see some of those techniques trickle down into the main Nicks line where appropriate, and also those lasts as well. So kind of an interesting thing, and it lets us work with leathers that probably don't fit within the current cost profile, whether that's like calfskin or shell, or, you know, some of these other things that are out there. What?
I love shell.
Andrew hates shell. He's
love
kind of mad at me
building
that I'm
Shell
doing this.
cordovan, it's my favorite.
Andrew's annoyed with me, but that's
No,
okay.
the new brand, it's sexy.
Yeah, that's
It looks,
exactly.
it's
Yeah.
amazing.
It's a good way to put it. We're trying to make a sexy boot, you know, and develop some techniques that like we just currently don't have. And so bear with us as we work through this, but I think it's going to be really awesome. And the prototypes look great.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about or try redeveloping historical footwear? So the Pullman.
Yeah, the Pullman.
So the Pullman is based on a historical Knapp, Knapp, engineer pattern that we picked up from basically a very, very apropos question. So there was a guy named Mattimore, Tom Mattimore in Wyoming, and he would make historical reproduction footwear, like for movies and stuff like that. And so we ended up purchasing his shop and all of them. Well, we purchased everything in his shop when he retired. And this was kind of the first thing to come out of that. I do think you'll see some like legacy World War I boots, some different World War II things. Yes, so absolutely, we're continuing to kind of work through that. In terms of like creating historical type boots specifically for historical reenactments, I don't know. I don't think so.
Probably not.
Well, it's funny because Tom, one of the reasons he quit or he retired is because nobody was doing
Not much of a market
he said
for it
nobody
anymore.
wants to be the Nazis anymore. I thought that was kind of funny. Well, you need a bad guy, you know.
Yeah, that's
But no, I don't know if that was true, but he was saying that business was kind of drying up a little bit. So, let me know, and if you guys think that is like a really good opportunity, we'll certainly take a look at it. But yes, definitely think there's some opportunities to remake things from the past and kind of borrow that inspiration for kind of what we're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few projects that we're kind of working on right now that are, part of it was looking at historical footwear and seeing what works, seeing what didn't.
Yep.
And kind of applying that to some
There's
patterns.
some cool English styles. Very much looks like the lace to toe, old school,
Okay.
like really old.
Okay. Yeah. Everyone here has got their kind of favorites, that sort of thing. It's kind of funny. You look in a lot of our prototype rooms, there's really old boots like all over the place that we're kind of looking at and using as inspiration and as a model in some cases. What are some of the things you'd never thought Nicks would produce, Lucas?
I'm gonna say Chelsea's for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say Chelsea.
I think that's the big one, and I think there was quite a bit of discussion when we talked about launching it of like, is this us? And I think ultimately we decided it can be.
Yep.
And
well, I think we made it very to our vibe, if you will. It's not for everybody, right? I know everybody out there that wants like a whole cut Chelsea, like Lofgren or something. Like that's not what this is, obviously. Right. But I think it fits our aesthetic, and it's a great boot. Yeah. My wife wore hers this weekend, and they're great. Andrew, anything that surprises you coming through?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the 360s, but once they started coming through more and more,
Yeah, I mean, Shuyler knows I had very big this whole talk legacy versus innovation. I was like, I think this might kill our brand if we do it wrong. Putting rubber instead of leather, it was a big step for our company. But then after prototyping it, trying it out, it's like, oh, okay, no, this actually makes a lot of sense. There's
we're
lot
trying
of
to solve the
benefits.
problem.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's cool to see military personnel be able to wear our boots.
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's
And I've been surprised at how many of those go through now. So I think it lets us just have a different construction. Yeah. I think you can make them a little lighter weight.
Yeah.
Water resistance obviously is better.
Yeah, the tactical boots are awesome. I've selling boots for a long time, and I constantly hear about people in the military who talk about their military boots were the worst. They hated them. Yep. And it's awesome having making something that's like, you want good boots, like these are people who really need them. I mean, we talk about helping firefighters and everything else. These people who live in their boots, and being able to provide them something that makes a difference in their daily lives is just awesome.
Yeah, I mean, like modern military boots aren't even that cheap. I mean, they're made. They're fine. But like, there's just a lot of constraints on that whole process, right? Because like with the Berry Act, everything has to be made domestically, and like it's funny. You talk to these guys, like they don't use a steel shank because you cannot literally source a steel shank in the U.S. And so I think it's like fiberglass now. It's just like whatever they can get. And so like they've got these constraints of A, they've got to hit a certain price point to get the contract, but B, they have to get everything domestically. And so it can lead to an interesting mashup, highly automated as well, approach to boot making. That it's a fine boot, but it's, I think we can exceed that. I mean, we do exceed that.
Yeah, there's definitely some where I feel like the 360s are an area that we're constantly trying to improve. I've got some cool ideas that kind of are in line with the 55 wedge with that boot.
Yep.
And then also if they get the lace to toe variations, it's a wonderful build. It's really the better build between the two.
What kind of 5 and 10 year plans are in place for growth? Yeah. So basically, this person's asking about other retail locations. I do think there is opportunity for that. I think we would probably have to do some research. We've got a few places that I think are in mind, but some research to kind of narrow those down. We recently did that pop-up shop in Salt Lake City. Nick Jarrett was there, and we were really surprised by the turnout. So we were only there for 2 days, and it was pretty busy, like basically the whole time. And Salt Lake City is not necessarily, like our, it's not like it's not the biggest city in the world. You know what I mean? So I mean, imagine if you were in like, a more densely populated area, I guess was what I'm getting at. So I think that's one thing. And then I do think you'll probably see, continued growth within the Nicks brand, but also, we hope to have some success with this higher end brand. And from there, I think that's a lot, but, we'll be working on those for the next 5 years, 10 years. I unfortunately haven't thought out that far ahead.
I think next year is going to be big after everything gets settled.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
I'm
there's a
really
lot
looking
happening
forward to
internally next year.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're doing a renovation, in the process of start kicking off a renovation here to add more space and increase the capacity and make it, frankly, a more comfortable building. Then I'll probably see some changes on like websites and internal systems, on that sort of thing. So we're kind of investing in, I would say, like the foundations to then take those next steps forward, which is fun.
Yep.
But really expensive. So
yeah. And I mean, we are also, we're looking to expand a little bit, expand our reach a little bit, not necessarily with Nicks stores, but with more dealers, wholesale accounts. So may see Nicks in stores, that aren't just on the West Coast in the future.
Sure. Andrew, this is for you. I almost thought of bringing Mikey in for this. Why does the SPI vary on many of the shoes and boots that you make? I have seen longer, less dense sole stitching, and sole stitching that looks almost welt-like.
I think it just kind of, where's Mikey? No.
So this question also follows up with like, if it varies from shoemaker to shoemaker. It does not vary from shoemaker to shoemaker.
There's one shoemaker.
We have one person doing the sole stitching.
I think,
right.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong,
training,
but I think ultimately, like the biggest thing is just the combination of, what sole is being stitched on, what leather is it being stitched on, different thicknesses of leather, different, how oily is it, how waxy is it. So
to me, it's the rebound rate, if you think about it like that. So if you have softer leather, a softer sole, basically think of, softer or harder materials. And so the needle will rebound maybe more quickly, and so it essentially has longer distance to travel before it gets to the next stitch. I'm not super aware of there being a lot of variation in this, so this is, we'll definitely look into this a little bit, but that is something I know can be an issue for us in the past.
And ultimately, I mean, you've talked about how old these machines are. It's just how is that machine cooperating that day? That's
also part of it.
Yeah, I think if it's 2-piece leather rubber, it usually is pretty uniform. As soon as you start adding things, lugs, toe caps with lineman patches, that's when you start getting some variation, I think. Especially when you start running into the slicker leathers like the waxed flesh.
Yep.
I think that's the bane of Mikey's existence is the waxed flesh with lug and toe cap.
Well, and so that's also why we bought this new machine to replace the Rapides, and we're working it into the production process, but it is more reliable and more consistent than the Rapides.
It looks pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool.
I'm excited to see him start to use it.
Cool thing. 55 last wedge progress.
Very
just
close.
The man.
It's coming. It's coming along. It's not going to be a 55 last. It's going to be an arched wedge. So It's going to be built on the H&W, and probably things like the Thurman NW, all of our low profile, low arched boots. But we're just going to arch them.
Yeah.
In a very out of the box sort of way.
Yeah. So we're currently just waiting on some dies, right? And then we can kind of figure out production process and
just getting everything kind of more manufacturable.
Yeah.
So I'm not spending, because it will be popular. There's
absolutely.
It's an awesome product.
It's
an awesome product.
Yeah.
My prototypes, I think, are probably the most comfortable for an arched boot that I have.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm super excited, super hopeful.
It'll be successful. It'll just right now it's just a question of make sure we can make them somewhat efficiently.
Yeah. I mean that's one of those. Again, we stepped back. We looked at it like, all right, everyone wants a 55 wedge. Why do they want a 55 wedge? They don't want it for the 55 last. They want it for the arch support. And the 55 has its own issues with heel to toe ratio.
Yeah.
And
if you look at 55 last boots with a wedge, usually the balance is wrong because the heel isn't brought high enough. If you look at other boots on the market, there's varying thicknesses, but the ratio is still just off. And is it acceptable? That's up to the consumer. But I've worn them, and it just kind of feels like I'm leaning back too far. And I don't think any of the wedge soles that I've seen are made for the ratio of the 55.
Yep.
Yeah.
So essentially, you just need to stack material up on the 55 to make that work in the heel. And then you run into problems once you start stacking up too many layers for breaking in, comfortability. So, there are products out there on the 55. I just don't think they work. And I think that this is a way better solution.
Yep. Do you think you'll ever run out of new boot models to release?
I hope not. For the sake of my job, I hope not. No, I mean, there's a lot out there. There's a lot kind of on the list that, we've talked about, just in our, strategy sessions, like what are we, who are we, what's our goal? And ultimately our goal is to, have an option out there, make it, to the durability and the quality that customers would expect under the Nicks name, which opens up opportunities for us of like, Chelsea boot, a Western boot, which is totally outside of our typical kind of product, product market. There's a lot of boots out there that we can make our way.
Slides.
Yeah. Nicks slides. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That would be
55 slides.
Yeah, 55 slides. Better than the flip-flops.
Yep.
The slides.
Mm-hmm.
This is a question we struggle with a lot. So what's the balance between growth through expanding the product line versus brand dilution, potentially taking your eye off the ball of the core of your market, assuming basically the work boots are still the core product?
Right.
You will be seeing, I think that's a fair point, but I think you will be seeing for this next wave, the new products will be addressing that core market. So after this high-end line, we do have some other models in the works that are aiming to improve our offerings in those spaces. And so, think like, I don't know about a better, but a different Builder Pro type approach.
Yeah.
That's kind of where we're going with this.
Yeah.
So I think you will see some truth or loyalty to that kind of core market and making sure that we're serving it. But applying some of the innovation and the things that we've learned over the last few months or last few years to that core offering.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that's it. I wanted to thank Andrew, Lucas, for your time and your knowledge. Also to the award-winning Kelsey Lursback. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, is this news to you? Did you?
Yeah, I didn't know I won an award.
Well, I haven't given it to you yet.
Whoa.
What's the award for?
For excellent podcast producing. No, you recently got a promotion too. Yeah.
Promotions are like awards.
Yeah,
That's true.
there you go. Congrats.
Well, sometimes, in some ways, they're better, right? 'Cause
That'd be awesome if every time you got a promotion, you got a little trophy to go with it. That you can
I like
put on
that.
your desk.
I think it's a great idea. It's a great idea.
I'll be waiting for it.
Andrew got promoted recently too.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Lucas, you're up next, buddy.
All right,
We'll have to
sweet.
keep working on this.
Good news.
So thanks you guys for listening. Do encourage you, please do leave a review, especially a 5-star one. Love to get this information out there and attract more people, and really appreciate you hanging with us for the duration. I hope you guys have a great day, and thanks again. Bye.
Bye. It's really struggling to keep this mic
I know, I'm
upright
so
the whole
sorry.
time.
I'm so sorry. Okay. I don't have a question today, so.
I have a question for you.
For me?
Yeah.
What?
If you were a vegetable and you had to eat yourself, what would you be?
Oh gosh.
Probably a Brussels sprout.
You like Brussels sprouts?
Yeah.
You can't cook it with bacon though.
No.
It's just straight up
Well, it's not straight. Can I cook it? Or am I eating this raw?
raw.
Ooh.
Then probably just like a carrot.
Okay, solid.